Welcome to Sewer Mutant, the podcast that takes you way underground to discover comics that you won't find anywhere else. Today I'm joined by Jon Renzella, the creator of the Sunderland series of graphic novels that he's illustrating entirely with woodcuts. The second book in the series, Solitude, was just published in February. It takes an already weird dystopian future story into some even weirder territories. The themes range from environmentalism to right-wing news networks to hippie communes to conspiracy theories to mind-altering drugs. I don't want to say too much about it for fear of spoiling it, but welcome to the show, Jon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe we could start by having you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into woodcutting as an art form.
Well, I was lucky in high school. My high school art teacher did printmaking, so we didn't have a lot of materials in the school, but somehow he had a little printmaking press, and we did lino cuts. And I did this program also when I was 17, and there was a teacher called Hag Demargian who he's a great woodcutter, and he also did a woodcut course there. So I kind of got introduced to it then. And later on in college, I thought I was going to be an oil painter, but my oil paintings were all like muddy and they just kind of mixed together. And with woodcut, that is impossible to do because it's black and white, sharp lines, all hard edges. And so my biggest weakness as an artist in painting was not even a thing when it came to woodcuts. So I kind of stuck with that for that reason.
Awesome, yeah. And where was that you went to school and learned this? Kind of like to my mind, at least in the U.S., like seems fairly unusual for people to practice these days.
I went to high school in New Hampshire, and I went to college in Minneapolis.
Okay.
And my college was an art school, Minneapolis College of Art and Design. So they had a big printmaking program.
Great. And so then, what possessed you to do a graphic novel entirely in woodcuts, let alone two of them? And I think there's a third volume planned, right? Is it a trilogy? Okay.
Yeah, the final volume will be next decade.
Yeah.
Well, I had done a big installation in 2010. It's 8 foot tall by 35 foot long woodcut, and it's hung up on the interior walls of a room. So if you stand inside of a 9 foot square room, it covers all of the walls. And so it's like totally surrounds you in 360 degrees. And it was this big, weird landscape. And there was a lot of content in it. And I thought it would be interesting to go back and tell the story of how that weird landscape got to be the way it was. So the Sunderland story is sort of the backstory to this installation I made. And I've always been interested in comics. Like the reason I'm an artist is because of comics. So I always wanted to do comic books since I was a kid. And also there's a long tradition of woodcut graphic novels, actually going back at least to the late 1800s, Franz Mazaril. And in the 20th century, like Lynn Ward, Giacomo Patri, these guys they were wordless, but they were graphic novels, sort of visual narratives. Usually about political themes or kind of sociological themes, things like that. And so I like that tradition, and I kind of wanted to do my own take on it.
Right, and that was called I think they called them wordless novels, not visual novels, but
something like that.
Yeah, it was kind of a pre-World War II thing, if I know my history right. But,
yeah, mostly.
Yeah, cool. But I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that those were not the first comics you saw as a kid.
No, definitely not. No, I grew up on Batman.
Cool. Well, yeah, so like eventually those two passions collided, and so that's how we get Sunderland. So were you thinking a lot about already when you were doing the installation about the story and the setting, or was it mostly, were you just seeing the visuals, like just had a vision for it, and like with the story coming later?
The installation was kind of a response to what seemed to be happening in the moment in like the zeitgeist. Everybody was kind of talking about the end times. This was 2010. So the 2012 like Mayan calendar ending thing was huge. Mm-hmm. And there was all kinds of just the variety of things in the air. I think social media was coming up. Alex Jones was becoming well known. There was, all the religious things like usual. All this stuff was kind of in the air. The 2008 financial collapse had just happened, and people were kind of reeling from that. And so all of this end times stuff was in the air, and I wanted to make a scene that was like, well, what if everybody's right? What if all of the end time scenarios happen simultaneously? So everybody is right in what they're saying. So I put all of those, like as many as I could find, in the installation. And then I thought it would be interesting to kind of take that as a jumping off point to explore a story. So I kind of had the the larger concepts there, but not the specifics.
Okay. And so, when you did the first book, so I think you had a co-author in the Eric Wise.
Yes.
Did you and Eric work out like the full trilogy in advance, or like just how much of the story did you already have kind of in the can when you got?
The large beats, sort of the big plot points, were all worked out, and then it's sort of filling in kind of the in between, the details and stuff. So usually, if I make a story, I have kind of the beginning, the end, and then a few large points in between, and then it's just a matter of kind of getting finer and finer grained.
Got it. Yeah. And so I know you've got some process videos on YouTube, but I was wondering if you maybe could talk a little bit kind of high level about the process for making these. Like, for example, did you have like a script that you were working from, and then do like layouts and sketching, or
I had
what was?
I worked from plot basically. I had all my plot points, and then I kind of I'm visual, so I drew out like a big timeline and kind of scribbled in all the little in between events with notes and stuff. And I had some images that I wanted to include, so I would do a lot of sketches and kind of how to get from this picture to this picture, this sort of in between, how to fill in the space. The script sort of, I guess I work in the Marvel method. It's probably the best way to describe
Mhm.
it. So going after the pictures are done, and I put in the script, and the kind of script is a sort of response to the pictures. So it's kind of take the plot, respond to that with a picture, and then take the picture and respond to that with the script, with the text.
Gotcha. Yeah. Um, well, so part of why I was wondering about the storytelling process is just like you said, like that it started with in 2010, and the world was a very particular way in 2010, and by the time we get to 2022 with the newest book, it's definitely a very different state of the world. I would say like there's definitely some big things have happened in the last
Sure.
several years. Um, so how much did the story kind of change in response to the way the world has
Actually,
shifted?
unfortunately, I think that the world became more like the story,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, I
kind
could
of
see that.
sad. That yeah, not so great. I guess it makes it easier to continue the story, but uh, yeah, things have changed, and a lot of the things that I was kind of thinking about back then have become more salient.
Yeah. Uh, so have you done other comics, or are these the only two?
I did like a digital comic a few years ago that was sort of, I was teaching myself how to use Clip Studio because I'd never done digital art before. And so I did that, and I've done a few comics here with a few local artists. So we have a little thing for Mosa Comics. We do American style sort of comic books here in Taiwan, and I've done a couple of like 1 to 3 page little stories, but nothing proper like this.
Right, yeah. And when did you move to Taiwan? Was that around 2010?
2008,
2008. Okay.
yeah, very beginning of
And
2008.
yeah, what brought you out there? Was it related to the woodcutting work, or did you go just to teach English like so many other people do? Or
I came here for lots of reasons. Mostly, I wanted to live in another country and experience that. I wanted to live somewhere where English wasn't the main language spoken. Just to have that experience. I chose Taiwan in particular for a few reasons. I was looking at so I wanted to be an artist, and so I was looking at places where the cost of living was low and the work you could get was relatively high compared to that. So I was an English teacher here for the first 8 years, and you make decent money compared to the cost of living. So I only had to work between 10 and 20 hours a week as a teacher, and I could spend the rest of the time in my studio. So of all the countries that I looked at, Taiwan had the best kind of the ratio. So I guess it was kind of calculated in that way. I expected to only stay for 1 or 2 years, but it turns out that this is the best place I've ever been. So I don't want to. I just couldn't leave.
Yeah, and you're involved with, I believe, a museum, a gallery there. Can you talk about that at all?
Well, in 2010, I had this residency in this big warehouse called Stock 20. So that every year the government gives out, I think it was 11. They had 11 big warehouses they gave out to artists, and it was this huge space. And I didn't need all of it. And there was a lot of artists here, a lot of foreigner artists, like Westerners who are teaching English. Kind of in my situation, they want to experience a different country. But it's a little bit difficult to get into the art scene here, especially if you don't speak Mandarin and if you don't have the connections. Like if you haven't, you don't go to university with the people who are in the scene. It's hard to sort of get in. And so I decided to turn the front of the warehouse into a little gallery and just kind of showed the art of my friends who I knew were artists. And after the residency ended, we had exhibitions every month at the gallery, and it went really well. So I decided to find a place where I could continue the gallery, sort of in the front of my studio. So we've been doing monthly shows since 2010,
Great, yeah, and that's
and
still
show foreigner artists and local artists as well.
cool. Uh, so, and I imagine that's going to be, all types of art, not just comics art or
Oh yeah,
woodcuts or
everything.
anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all
Okay.
kinds of stuff. And also we've had live music workshops, classes, things like that. And the gallery is nonprofit, so we don't take any money from the artists because it's artist run.
Okay. And how do you think being in Taiwan has shaped uh, the Sunderland stories? It sounds like it started while you were there, and
Hmm.
uh, do you think that it changed your perspective on, I don't know, on the West or on the story?
Well, it gives you a point of comparison, like another data point for how a society can be. So when you grow up in your country, right, you're especially in America, you don't get a lot of outside sort of the way that other people live in other places is not as easy for us in America to kind of appreciate. At least it wasn't for me, until you go abroad and you kind of see like, oh yeah, things can be like this or things can be like that. So it definitely gave a kind of counterpoint to the culture that I grew up in, and it made it I don't know, it made it maybe the different perspective made it, I don't know if it's easier to kind of pick out things, but it, it changed my ability to kind of pick out things about the US, the good and the bad, right? And the kind of way things are going. So kind of insider outsider or something like that.
Yeah. Or what you're saying there made me wonder about, does it make it easier to imagine, situations changing pretty dramatically? Because I think that's something that for a lot of people it's hard to wrap your head around, the idea of, everything that kind of suburban middle class living just going away, and everyone living under a military dictatorship, or living in a hippie commune, or
Hmm.
living in a survivalist bunker, like all these different kind of, you know scenarios. Do you think
Yeah, well,
that is that
definitely.
like having that kind of like day-to-day fabric uplifted, like?
Yeah, well, especially here. I mean, as long as I've lived here, there's been, hundreds of missiles pointed at us from across the strait, and it's a very precarious kind of situation. At the same time, Taiwan used to be like a one-party dictatorship for decades, and then in the '90s they kind of switched to democracy, and now they have a really vibrant, free, open society. It's remarkable how well they kind of made that change. I mean, martial law wasn't lifted until I think 86 or 88, and dancing was like illegal here in the '80s. So to have that switch in such a short a period of time, you can definitely see the fragility of systems, both systems that you think maybe are good and that maybe you think are bad. Uh, they can change, and yeah, the stability is precarious, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose the pandemic has really given people all over the world maybe a shock to the system in that sense too, of just the day to day life can just be utterly disrupted for unknown amounts of time. But yeah, it can be hard to imagine, just living out your life that maybe it won't always be possible to just get in your car and go to Starbucks and order whatever you want, and yeah, maybe everything's going to be closed, or there's going to be supply chain problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think visiting other countries and seeing living in a different way, yeah, definitely opens one's eyes to the idea that things can just be different, like you said.
Yeah, and when you travel, you also see like you see how well you have it, and also how things could be better too. So I've been to
Yeah,
lots of countries, been very lucky. Like when you live in a place like Taiwan, it's you have access to a different set of places than when you live in America. You know, if you live in America, maybe you can go to Canada, to Mexico, or the Caribbean, like the sort of nearby places to visit. And here the nearby places are just so wildly different from one another. You know, you can go to Japan and Korea, but you can also go to Southeast Asia, or like Nepal, India, places like that, and really see like, man, we've got it pretty good in a lot of ways, but also there's so many ways that things could be better, and you can kind of, I don't know, it makes it more contrast, you know.
yeah, or just different. I mean, just the people have in other places have different values or different
Yeah,
different
definitely.
priorities, I guess. And
And the things you take for granted are not that way by default.
right, yeah, yeah.
People
There's
have chosen to make things this way,
yeah,
so it's kind of empowering like that too.
yeah, both for good or for ill in a lot of cases.
Hmm.
Great. Well, that's about all I had for questions. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think I should have asked, or that you would want to talk about?
um I guess. Well, you asked about comics. I'm making a proper pen, ink, and watercolor comic that I'm starting just now. I'm working on it with my wife, who's a neuroscientist, and so we're combining our two areas of knowledge. It's going to be it's a like a sci-fi story. So
Cool.
I'm excited about that. It's a different kind of way of thinking than making a woodcut story.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're not. You said at the beginning like that you had been in oil painting and then got out of it, but it
Mhm.
sounds like you haven't limited yourself to woodcutting by any means in terms
No, no,
of
not at
art.
all. I
Yeah.
mean, I also do tattoo. I was a tattoo. I apprenticed at a shop here, and so I do that as well. But I like all the different art forms. I hope, to to be lucky enough to be able to try them all out. You know, to do something in almost every art form. I think that it's a lot of fun experimenting with different things and learning how to do different techniques. And each of those techniques has improved my wood cutting too. So it's kind of interesting how that works.
Right. Yeah. Cross training,
Hmm.
I guess.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess so.
Uh, cool. Yeah. Well, is there anything you can say about that new project? Like how far along it is, or what
Uh,
the?
it's in the story stage. Um, we've done some sample pages, and we're working out the details of the story. And I'm practicing every day at trying to improve my pen and ink and my watercolor. So
Is it neuroscience themed?
yeah, yeah. There's a good deal of that in there. So like my wife is a researcher, and so taking kind of some of the concepts and the ideas from her field, and mixing them uh, with the art.
Cool. And you had joked about the next volume will be another decade out,
Hmm.
because there was, I think, 7 years between the first volumes, which is understandable. I mean,
Hmm.
flipping through this is an enormous undertaking. Um, but what actually do you have a sense of the timeline for the next book
Yeah,
in the
actually,
Sunderland series?
so uh, in addition to being kind of about society and the human condition, each story is a kind of a self-portrait as well. So the first volume I made in my 20s, and the second volume I made in my 30s, and so the third one I'll make in my 40s. And it was intended to be this way, like planned it out. So how my own mindset and thinking changes, it affects the story and how kind of things are presented. And so I'm kind of interested just personally in looking back and seeing the differences in my own sensibilities. So I want to wait a few years until I'm 40 to start the next one. And I
Okay,
think that's
cool.
also having that kind of spacing it out makes it more interesting, because things in the real world change. We'll change it. We'll have changed enough, hopefully for the better. We'll see, but for the different,
Yeah.
to be sure. And so that kind of, I feel like when it's all finished, it'll hopefully make it a bit more fresh as well.
Cool. Yeah, and I can really see a lot of progress between the two books. It's really interesting to look at the second one, and yeah, I actually kind of wish this was a video so I could show some images from it. But I'm just flipping through the second volume, and yeah, it's just there's just so many. I mean, it's not that the first one was bad or anything. It's just that the second one is just so good that with just so many really strong images that yeah, I, I think it's in that sense, I guess maybe it was worth the wait, I guess. So I hope the third one. I would prefer not to wait 7 years
Right.
for it, but if it's going to be that much better than number two was over number one, then I guess maybe the wait will be worth it.
Well, thanks. I hope so.
Yeah.
I'll see. Hope my
Cool. No
craft keeps
pressure.
improving. Right.
Yeah. So now the last thing I like to ask guests before we sign off is if there are any comics that you didn't make that you would recommend our listeners check out.
Any comics I didn't make that I would recommend? Well, just from the art standpoint, I think anything by Mobius or
Oh
Moebius,
yeah, yeah,
however you say.
yeah.
I just got the Inkle. I just ordered the hardcover of that. I'm really excited for it. But I love his work, and just how creative his everything everything he touches is. So that yeah, off the top of my head, it's hard to say. Uh, I just got this. It's not a comic. I just got this book of illustrations by Gustave Doré. It's illustrations for the Divine Comedy by Dante. This is from the 1800s, but they're incredible. If you like black and white art, this guy, he's a brilliant illustrator, and the pictures are haunting and beautiful, and the kind of all the tones and stuff. But that's not really a comic book, so
Well, I mean, there's definitely some overlaps in it's a form of sequential storytelling, like books like that had that were extensively illustrated, even if they weren't telling the whole story on the merits of the illustrations the way comics work, but we're like an illustration for every scene essentially.
Mhm.
But
Oh yeah, and lately I've been looking at a lot of it's called Space Girl by Travis Charest, and all of them are on his website, and it's just amazing. It's like it's one panel, one panel, one panel, one panel. Like there's not pages of it, but it's a comic, and it tells a sequential story. And just the pen and ink work it's probably the best pen and ink work I've ever seen. And so I've been
yeah,
looking at that a lot.
that's the same Travis Charest that did Wildcats in the '90s. Do you
Yeah, I
know?
think so. Yeah, I think he was an
Okay,
image
yeah,
artist in the 90s.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I kind of wondered whatever happened to him.
well,
Yeah,
look,
he did.
find
Yeah,
find Space Girl on his website,
okay,
because it's incredible.
we'll do. All right, great. Well, I will let you get about your day. So it's morning in Taiwan right now, and I will be paradoxically going and eating dinner now because it's
All right.
dinner time in the on the west coast of the U.S. So
Time for more
thanks so much
coffee for me.
yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, and yeah, really dug the books, and looking forward to seeing whatever's next.
Well, thank you very much, and good talking to you.